Well, let's break down this 2025 schedule for Illinois, and here is that full schedule. You can see first, let's just look at the non-conference. They've got Western Illinois at Duke and Western Michigan, so a pretty easy non-conference. Duke, I don't expect to be great next year. It's a respectable opponent. It is a Power 4 team. They did go, I believe, 9-3 last year, and that game is on the road. So that's not going to be one of those that you can just show up and win. It'll be a game, but Duke, I don't think will be near Illinois' level in 2025. I just don't. So that should be a fairly easy win for Illinois. And then of course you got a couple of other Group of 5 or a FCS and a Group of 5 team that they should take care of business in those games. So home and away, how does that look? You've got Western Illinois, Western Michigan, and then you've got 5 home games in the Big Ten. You've got USC, Ohio State, Rutgers, Maryland, and Northwestern. So 5 games at home, and then you've got 4 games on the road in the Big Ten. So Duke is on the road, of course, non-conference, and then Indiana, Purdue, Washington, and Wisconsin on the road. Maybe it gives you a shot against teams like USC and Ohio State. Maybe they can win those games, and you feel pretty good about Rutgers, Maryland, and Northwestern at home. And then on the road, Wisconsin, Washington could be tricky games. Indiana figures to be pretty good again. Purdue, who knows? I mean, they were awful last year. So, those are not easy wins there on the road. But I think the thing that jumps out to me is who you avoid. They avoid Oregon. They avoid Penn State. They avoid Michigan. This is a pretty favorable schedule. Now, if Indiana's a top 10 team again, and you got Ohio State and Indiana, you do have a couple of really tough games there. But overall, I would say this works out pretty well for Illinois in the Big Ten. You look at who they added and who they lost. So they removed Michigan, Michigan State, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, and Penn State. They added Indiana, Maryland, Ohio State, USC, Washington, and Wisconsin. You don't have to play Michigan this year. You don't have to play a Minnesota team that was pretty good last year. Nebraska, a team on the rise. Oregon and Penn State, 2 of the top teams in the conference. And like I said, Indiana and Ohio State adding those opponents, and possibly USC. I'm not sure how good USC is going to be. I think it's a good trade here. It is definitely a good trade. And remember, this is a team that went 9-3 last year. So 9-3, and then you get an easier schedule. Who knows? Maybe Illinois could be in that conversation for the Big Ten championship game. All right, so they'll start with Western Illinois on August 30th at home. Then it'll be on the road at Duke on September 6th. And then it's Western Michigan at home on September 13th. So all 3 non-conference games in the first 3 weeks. A big road game there on September 20th on the road at Indiana. This is actually a pretty tough stretch. I would say this is by far the toughest stretch from Indiana down to Ohio State. You've got Indiana on the road. You've got USC at home September 27th. And then it's Purdue on the road October 4th and Ohio State on October 11th. Again, that's a pretty tough stretch because when you look at the rest of the schedule, Illinois has a real shot to win their final 5 games. So if they can get through the first 7 games with 1 or 2 losses, again, maybe they lose to Indiana on the road, or they lose to USC and they lose to Ohio State. But if you can get through those games with just 2 losses, then Illinois is going to be in the playoff conversation, again, if they can win out. Now, I don't know if with this schedule, if that's going to be enough to get them into the playoff at 10-2, but we'll see. So they get the bye week. Their first bye week is pretty late. It's actually October 18th. So I don't really see this much where teams got 7 games before their first bye week. So that's why I say that stretch is going to be tough from Indiana to Ohio State. Then they'll play 2 games. They'll play Washington on the road on October 25th, and they'll play Rutgers at home on November 1st. 2 games, and then another bye week. So it is kind of weird how their bye weeks fall. But you like having that first one where it is because it's after a big game against Ohio State, and it's before you have to go travel out west to Washington. So that one is in a good spot. The second bye week, maybe you'd like to have that maybe 1 week later and have Rutgers, Maryland at home back-to-back and have that before a road game at Wisconsin. I don't know. But, yeah, Maryland right there on November 15th. Then it is a road game at Wisconsin November 22nd and Northwestern on the 29th. So we're talking about some tough road games. Yes, Wisconsin and Washington and Indiana. I'm looking at those 3 games. Tricky games there, but a lot of games at home for them. USC and Ohio State at home, Rutgers, Maryland. A lot of these games where they're going to be a pretty good favorite at home. So it could come down to those road games. If they can go on the road and win, And let's say they lose to Ohio State and lose somewhere else. Again, this is a team that could be in that playoff conversation and possibly in the mix for a Big Ten championship game berth. So how does this stack up with the other teams in the Big Ten? Well, this is actually one of the easiest schedules in conference play. You look at their opponents from last year in Big Ten play. So the opponents in 2025, this is their records from last season, 33 and 48, so a 41% winning percentage. That is near the bottom. Only Michigan has a lower percentage there. And I think it's actually maybe even easier than what this number suggests, because I think some of those teams may not be quite as good as they were last year, especially like if you look at Indiana. Maybe they're not quite as good. So, yeah, I think this schedule sets up really well for Illinois, and I think they are a real dark horse to possibly get to the Big Ten championship and maybe even the college football playoff.